A lie is a loan taken out with truth as collateral. It's easily spent in a time of greed, but ruinous when the bill comes due. Step back with me into the days of Imperial Russia, the early 1900s. The once mighty Romanov dynasty is cracking under the weight of lost wars, starving peasants, revolutionary whispers, and the looming shadow of World War I. At the center of it all sits Tsar Nicholas II and his wife, Tsarina Alexandra. They are devoted but increasingly isolated parents. Their young son and heir, Alexei, suffers from hemophilia, a brutal bleeding disorder that threatens his life with every injury. The royal couple lives in constant fear and grief, desperate for any hope that can save their child and their dynasty. Into this fragile, pain-filled world arrives Grigori Rasputin. He is a wild-haired, charismatic peasant mystic from a remote Siberian village. He carries no official title, he commands no armies, he holds no government post. He simply appears at court claiming divine healing powers and spiritual visions. And through a mix of calming presence, folk remedies, and apparent success in easing the boy's bleeding episodes, he wins the trust of the desperate parents. Nicholas and Alexandra begin to call him our friend. They see him as a God-sent guide in their darkest hour. But Rasputin's role does not stop at prayer and healing. He starts to whisper. He warns the royal couple of hidden enemies, traitors wearing friendly faces, foreign plots, and disloyal ministers undermining the throne from within. He claims a special spiritual insight that the established advisors and nobles around them lack. He sows seeds of suspicion inside the palace itself. This general cannot be trusted, that noble family is scheming, the old order is blind and corrupt, and he elevates himself as the only reliable voice protecting the family from the darkness that's closing in. The Tsar and Tsarina, grieving and fearful, listen, and they defend him fiercely against growing scandals. His heavy drinking, his womanizing, and political meddling. They allow his influence to spread even as it alienates the broader court, the public, and many longtime allies. And the consequences were devastating. Trust inside the royal household and government fractured. Paranoia replaced steady leadership. Rasputin's presence became the very public symbol of corruption and madness at the top. The divisions and distrust he helped inflame accelerated the collapse of the monarchy, and in 1917 the Romanovs were overthrown. Nicholas, Alexandra, and their 5 children were imprisoned by the Bolsheviks and later died. The empire they believed they were protecting was destroyed. And although Rasputin himself was murdered in 1916, the poison had already done its work. He never fired a shot or signed a death warrant. He simply poured lies and conspiracies and whispers of betrayal into the ears of a grieving family at their most vulnerable moment and watched their legacy burn. All of that to say, history doesn't repeat itself, but it does tend to rhyme. Candace Owens didn't kill Charlie Kirk. She didn't stand on the roof, climb up it, lie down, chamber a bullet, and fire it into his neck. But what she has done in the aftermath of his brutal death is step into the raw grief and shock of a movement that lost its leader and purported to offer them the one thing that they were desperate for: answers. Answers to the who, what, why, and how surrounding the loss of a man who changed the very world around him. And just like Rasputin once did with a grieving Romanov family, so did Candace grab the ear of a nation by claiming special insight and warning of betrayals from within. On her podcast, episode after episode, she has vociferated about internal plots and betrayals in Charlie's circle that include his own wife, his closest allies, and his most beloved friends. Security failures that couldn't possibly be anything but intentional. Foreign cabals that clearly were in cahoots to take Charlie out. And the constant refrain that everyone except her is wrong or lying about Charlie. Neither Charlie's widow, nor his confidants, mentors, his pastor, his closest friends like Tyler Boyer and Andrew Kolovit and Blake Neff, None of them are privy to this special revelation that Candace has. And it's actually even worse because she insists some of them might be privy to that information, might have been privy to it beforehand, and could possibly be involved in or aware of his murder before it happened. Worst of all, she has turned her wrath especially on Erica, publicly berating her, suggesting that she should be hauled down to jail and dragged into an interrogation room, and forcing her into the most vile catch-22 you can think of. If she cries that her husband's dead, she's mocked as shedding fake tears, performing for an audience, and not actually grieving. But that somehow the loss of her husband and her children's father doesn't actually break her heart, so she has to pretend it does. But on the other hand, if she's seen not crying at any given moment, or even more scandalous, if she dares to muster up a smile, she's scolded as a nefarious psychopath who clearly isn't grieving the right way. Therefore, it must be up to something and is entitled to bottomless scrutiny and scorn. Erica has been convicted in the court of Candace as guilty of being associated with the main victim. Neither positive emotion nor negative emotion is she allowed to express without drawing the relentless ire of Candace and her ilk. Candace has taken tragedy, vulnerability, and turned it into steady content, into fierce audience loyalty, and into her own expanding platform and influence. And that influence is still growing even after the preliminary hearing this month, in which evidence was presented that put to bed a whole slew of Candace's lies as just that. The result of Candace's crusade against reality is exactly what you would expect, and exactly what happened with Rasputin. Deep division inside the movement Charlie helped build, trust between one's allies shattered, and a legacy that is slowly being poisoned and distorted by the very conspiracies that she keeps pushing in his name. Rasputin didn't have to kill the Tsar. He only had to keep feeding suspicion and betrayal narratives into a grieving inner circle until the whole structure started eating itself alive from the inside. And Candace is doing the same thing. She didn't need to pull the trigger. She only needed to make sure that the wound never stopped bleeding, and that the people left behind turned on each other instead of facing what actually happened. And that's the great irony in all of this. Loan taken out with truth as collateral. It's easily spent in a time of greed, but ruinous when the bill comes due. All the while, the interest compounds in silence, and all that remains is the truth that you no longer own. Candace Owens, on day one, set out to go to war for the truth about what happened to Charlie, but as the truth continued to surface, its greatest enemy was shown to be the one who claimed to be its fiercest defender.